Yes, if only we could have Australia Post fast track. That would be great. Charles, welcome to the show.
Hey, hello, Nick. How you doing?
Yeah, good. A little bit frustrated with Australia Post at the moment. That's how I am.
It sounds like it too.
Yeah, look. I had a very important bunch of documents sent to me in the mail, and they haven't turned up. So, unfortunately, it was a very unreliable experience. I'm a bit grumpy about that.
Yes, it can happen, unfortunately, as you say. Sometimes, mostly they do a really good job, but every now and then that one document that, and you notice it, don't you? You notice it when it doesn't turn up. You never really pay much attention to it when everything works.
Yeah.
And it's like everything. I always say to the guys in my organisation, when things are going fantastic, I know it's about you. When things are going really, really bad, I know it's because of me.
Probably safe to say, in the real estate game, if you're going to be exchanging documents, you're not doing it email, you probably should put it in express post pack.
Yeah, one would think, yes.
Yeah, important
exactly. Yeah, but even that has caused problems for me, but still, nonetheless, overall, I guess at the end of the day, I get a lot more delivered than I don't.
Good.
Which is helpful.
That's encouraging. Now, tonight we'll have a look at the RBA Governor's comments and what housing measures can we expect to see revealed in this week's budget. That's with Tim Lawless, who's head of research at CoreLogic. He joins us soon.
Yeah, and we were talking about that. You remember you said to me, so you're calling housing affordability as part of the election, the upcoming election, and I still am. And they've got no choice. I mean, whether they can do something about it is another thing, but they've got no choice but to talk about it.
Yep, indeed. We'll also take a good, decent look later at the weekend auction and clearance rates in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. You've had some time to ruminate over those. Matt Shalhoub will have something to share about that as well. Yeah,
the results are still very favourable, and going back a few weeks ago when we first started talking about reaching the top of the market, I'm pretty sure most of the property pundits that are out there talking are not saying it's at the top of the market. They're cautiously saying it could be approaching the top of the market from all of the slowdown we're seeing, whether it's an open for inspection or approvals or so on, or even price growth that's slowed down. But again, they're talking about certain areas only, and Australia is 1,000 different marketplaces, Nick, and we've got to make sure that we get people who are living in their own marketplace to understand their marketplace, rather than get caught up in the hype of one or two marketplaces and make decisions that could be detrimental to their financial future.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And we'll go to two of those marketplaces, two of the 1,000 you've spoken about. One is Canberra tonight, and the other
this is good. The other one, Mawson Lakes in South Australia. But the reason I'm really excited about the Canberra one is that, again, we've been watching that for quite some time now, and we've been talking about how that marketplace has been very, very hot for a long time, and nobody paid it much attention. Everybody was focused on Sydney and Melbourne. They completely missed the fact that Canberra's clearance rates were sitting in the 60s and 70s and the odd 80 clearance rate. But they weren't focusing on the fact that there have been a lot of releases of new suburbs in Canberra, and there are still people queuing because the supply line is still not sufficient to meet the demand. So I'm glad we've got somebody on from Canberra. That's Brian Nancarrow, and Brian's right in the centre of Canberra, a very, very well established real estate practitioner. And because Century 21 is a global organisation, Canberra itself is very well known. The people that migrate in and out of Canberra know the brand very, very well. And so Brian deals with a significant number of nationalities from around the world.
I found it interesting a couple of weeks ago you used the term the places in between, which is not just a kind of a connection to a song I like, but it's a very wise bit of real estate advice, because you get caught up in the bubble and the froth of the places doing really, really well, so you begin to look beyond all of that for a place that may be more affordable for you, and that's the place in between. And maybe, I mean, ultimately I suppose Canberra is a place in between Sydney and Melbourne.
Amazingly enough, it is. Yeah. You fly right over the top of it when you're going down to Melbourne. You see the beautiful city of Goulburn and Canberra on your way through, and of course my little hometown of Crookwell just out on the right-hand side as you're flying down. Yep. But the other area, Mawson Lakes, is an interesting one too, because
that's in South Australia?
Yes, it's right. in the city of Adelaide. And what I like about Mawson Lakes is that it has a range of significantly new properties, new developments, cafe styles. It's really maturing. Every single time I go down there, I see a big change in that area. So we'll look forward to listening to what Wally Karpuik has to say. And Wally's a senior real estate auctioneer, certainly a a very, very long-standing real estate practitioner in South Australia, raised his family in South Australia. So he knows that patch very, very well. So we're going to find out about Mawson Lakes, which are, again, a location that you would never hear people talking about too much.
Some great stuff tonight with Charles Tarbey on Property Fast Track, 13 12 83. If you have a question for Charles, he has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to real estate. So, hey, use this chance to pick his brains on 13 12 83, or you can email click feedback at talkinglifestyle.com.au. So, Charles, what are your thoughts on the auction clearance rates over the weekend, starting with New South Wales? Does it surprise you, impress you?
No, it's still pretty good. I mean, in Sydney, when you go back a few weeks ago when they were calling the top of the market, they said 72.6% it's going to be top of the market. Then it hit 81%. And in this last week, it was 77.8%, a very healthy clearance rate. Now, I'd certainly be happy as a real estate practitioner with a 60% clearance rate on the day, because you can negotiate property after an auction when prices and buyers and sellers haven't met in the middle of price. And Melbourne came in also at 78.4%. So I'm not quite sure what the problem is, although Melbourne was 82 last week, but it was 71 over Easter, 71.2% over Easter. So I think that the clearance rates are quite solid. The one that surprised me was Brisbane. It came in at 60.8%. I haven't seen it hit 60 in the last year. So
right.
I'd say that that's a really good sign there. So the marketplace overall still in Canberra, in Adelaide, all in the 60s. Again, when you're talking the top of the market, or when you're talking a tough real estate market, you're talking auction clearance rates of anywhere between 40 and 50,
right.
sometimes 55. And I mean, that's tough. That's really tough as an auctioneer calling auctions and trying to get buyers and sellers to meet in the middle.
In the news just gone now, we heard the release today that Sydney house prices are up since January by 4% and in Melbourne by 5%. Does that surprise you?
Yeah, well, Hobart. What about Hobart?
Didn't hear Hobart yet.
Yeah, Hobart was
that?
big. Hobart was some sort of 5.3%, I think, came through. And that's a topic I'm going to be talking about later on Sky Business.
Okay.
Because of that. And it's just one of those areas that is probably benefiting from the halo effect, if you like, of those capital cities that have gained equity.
So what's your definition of jumping there of halo effect? What is that exactly?
Well, I guess at the end of the day, it all gets captured. It starts somewhere, and you get areas like Melbourne. Let's just look at Hobart for a second, or even Sydney for a second, and we look at the amount of equity that people have gained. And they're sitting there, and then all of a sudden Wollongong and Nowra, or the Central Coast, or Newcastle, or Geelong, or the regional areas in Melbourne, they start to benefit from the fact that people have gained equity in their properties, and that equity can be utilised to purchase other property. So all of a sudden it starts moving out like a wave, and that wave effect would have hit Hobart or would have hit Tasmania, where people in Melbourne have gained significant equity, and then all of a sudden Hobart looks incredibly cheap for an investment property,
right.
and it's literally just a quick flight away.
Yeah, and some beautiful homes there to be had, some good property.
Absolutely, and the lifestyle there is magnificent, and people I know that live there and the people that operate within my organisation down there, they just love it. They love the lifestyle, and they love the fact that they can raise their families in a clean environment.
Good stuff. 13 12 83. If you've got a question for Charles Tarbey, he's here to help you tonight. What about vacancy rates, Charles?
Yeah, I've been very impressed with Perth's change. It had been sitting in the sevens, and last week it was 7.85. The week before it was 7.78. But if I go backwards, I was talking about this before, it was in the tens, and that was really scaring me. It did climb again this week to 8.88. I don't know whether it's just a sign of this week, because we look at the vacancy rates today to measure them and to make sure. It's still pretty good. Sydney is just remarkable, and their vacancy rates here in Sydney evened out at 0.41%. So
wow,
that gives you an idea of how tough it is to get something in Sydney.
Good for landlords, but hard if you're looking
harder
for a place.
tenants. Yeah. Look, Melbourne was magnificent as well, not as good as Sydney, but 1.09% was a vacancy rate. Those three capital cities together have given me a vacancy rate of average of 3.46%. So it's been sitting in the mid threes for quite a few weeks. That's comfortable, but I'd really like to see a change in Perth. I'd like to see that trending downwards.
So that 3% which you average out at, how does it compare to what we had, say, 10 or 20 years ago, given your background knowledge?
Yeah, I look back at properties for rent, and we would do a lot of things to get tenants into properties. I mean, your vacancy rates were certainly much higher. There was a lot more purchasing going on with young couples in those days, out and going out further and further west. They were quite prepared to travel, so the landlords were competing. And I know that from a real estate agent's point of view, I struggle with my property management business in those days. You struggle because you did have a significantly higher number, and even if you did have a higher number of rentals out there, the tendencies that were coming through were low because they were more interested in buying. And those people that did rent through me, and when I go back and look, rented there to find out what it's like to live there before they purchased. Yep. So it was always a transition that they were going through. There's nothing like today. Today's vacancy rates are really, really difficult for tenants compared to what it was like.
So it's safe to say, just quickly before we go to a break, and we'll get Tim Lawless on, if you are in the business, as people were back then, of renting in a suburb to try before you buy, if you like, and you did find a place that you were keen on buying, and it meant breaking your rental lease to get out, to move into that home, you probably wouldn't have too much trouble finding someone to take up that lease. No,
not today you wouldn't. If you want to do that now, real estate practitioners should have their databases intact, and if they do, they would have an unlimited supply of people looking for rental property.
Wow, good to know. Australia's biggest home loan sale is on now, and there's no better time to switch your existing home loan to a new lender and potentially save tens of thousands of dollars. Comparison site Rate City is bringing together the country's most competitive lenders, and they'll all be vying for your home loan during the Switch and Save sale. The sale is on for 40 hours only and will give you access to exclusive loan deals. The big banks are under pressure and putting rates up, so turn up the heat and switch and save. Corker Bank. Register for the sale right now at talkinglifestyle.com.au. Rate City's Switch and Save sale. It's Australia's biggest home loan sale. It's on now. Register at talkinglifestyle.com.au. It's been a big week for the world, and when it comes to real estate, it's about to get even bigger, Charles. And last week, the Reserve Bank decided to keep the official cash rate on hold, leaving it at record lows, and the federal budget is out tomorrow night. As we know, there's been plenty of talk about it. Will there be any measures to tackle housing affordability? Tim Lawless is the head of research with CoreLogic, and he's on tonight with Property Fast Track. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Nick. G'day, Charles.
G'day, Tim. I love it when Tim comes on anywhere, any show. We get him at conferences. We get him to do all sorts of things. Absolutely outstanding with his knowledge. So, Tim, what do you think is going to happen tomorrow night?
Well, the budget's being touted as a bit of a silver bullet for housing affordability, but we need to keep in mind there's not a great deal the federal government can do to solve housing affordability.
And we were talking about that a little earlier on. We were saying that they've got to talk about it, but there's not much they can do. But they have to have it on their agenda.
Absolutely, and it's become such a public discussion point, and it's very high profile. But in reality, this is such a complex issue that we need to see, well, sure, the federal government's got to lead, but we need to see state and local governments working cohesively with the federal government as well as private developers.
But how are they going to do that? Because, for years we've been talking about different councils and different councils in state governments, how they all work differently than others, and some are pro-development, others are sort of anti-development. Then you've got different state governments that are incredibly proactive. Which one would you see as a standout that's a proactive state government that you're aware of? I can give you one.
There's a few really good examples, and the blend between local government and state government is really well demonstrated by the Greater Sydney Commission. It's probably a fantastic example, because this is a really good example of a group that's actually coordinating land policy and strategic housing policy across a very broad area. The Southeast Queensland region as well.
Right.
You've got Brisbane City Council, one of the biggest, if not the biggest council in Australia, really does highlight that the fragmentation of really small council areas makes it really difficult to get a cohesive town plan in place because of that NIMBYism that you were just talking about.
And there's been a fair bit of talk as well in the fact that stamp duty is now been changed, considerations in Victoria, and that it may pump prices. What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
Stamp duty is really challenging, particularly for the people that don't already own a home. So we actually just released a housing affordability or perceptions of affordability report in the market today. And the number one barrier for many people in the marketplace has been stamp duty. The other barrier, of course, is raising a deposit, and those two, you can kind of group them together because the two together really do comprise the largest hurdle for people getting into the housing market. But, of course, everybody, I think, does acknowledge that stamp duty is very inefficient. I wouldn't be surprised if, 10 years from now, we don't have stamp duty as a transactional tax. We have a broad-based land tax.
Yeah. Well, land tax, that's the interesting one too, Tim, and you and I both know we're not quite sure why we pay land tax yet. We're not seeing any benefit. I know it goes somewhere, but it certainly doesn't go anywhere that benefits people that pay land tax.
Well, if you look at the stamp duty revenue, is the second largest revenue stream for state governments at the moment. So you can understand why they don't want to
move it on.
The stamp duty regime. But look at somewhere like WA. As soon as transaction numbers start to dry up and values start to go backwards, they've got a bit of a budgetary black hole. So it does make budgeting and planning very difficult.
I think $6.2 billion is expected to be generated out of stamp duty in Victoria this year alone.
Oh, that's massive.
It's a big revenue stream, so I understand why the governments don't want to lose it.
And you get cornered in many different ways too, Tim. I mean, you can move. My children had a property in a company together, and one went and purchased the other one out, and there was a lot of angst there for some time about whether or not stamp duty should be paid in that transaction. So there are issues related to stamp duty where I've had to pay stamp duty on ownership of property just by changing the entity sometimes in certain parts of the country. But Tim, can I ask you with regards to the Reserve Bank of Australia, because they're sort of sitting there, there's not a lot they can do. Do you think they're worried about mortgage-related stress in Australia?
I think they're probably fairly comfortable with mortgage-related stress, but they're becoming a little bit less comfortable. And you would have seen this in a speech from the Reserve Bank Governor.
We talked about his family, didn't he?
Well, he did, and he talked about the fact that the Australian economy as well is becoming less resilient to a shock. And that's one of the key considerations, of course, is monetary policy as well as financial stability. And one of the great graphs that the Governor brought up in his speech looked at the mortgage repayment buffers. And this is how much people are either ahead or behind or on track with paying their mortgages down. And it's one of the stats the Reserve Bank used to bring up and demonstrate the resilience of mortgage holders if they did run into, if one of them lost a job or a member of the family became sick, they had a bit of a buffer that they could fall behind in their repayments. What we're seeing now, though, is that more than 30% of mortgage holders only have less than 1 month of a repayment buffer.
Yeah, right.
A very small proportion are in arrears. Of course, that's less than 1%. So we are starting to see those higher debt levels just starting to whittle away gradually at the resilience of households to take on a shock to their budgets.
Is there any evidence to suggest that maybe they're more comfortable doing that when the rates are as low as they are?
I think that's absolutely the case, and you can really see that in the way that debt levels have increased. In fact, the main ratio that the Reserve Bank would be referring to is the household debt-to-income ratio, which is currently at a record level. It's at 189%. That simply means that household debt is almost twice the size of the average household disposable income per annum. So it really does highlight that households have taken on more debt. That's partly due to the fact that, interest rates are very low and getting credit up until the last 18 months or so has been reasonably easy. There's a few other reasons why debt levels increased, and that could be attributed to the very strong population growth and simply the fact that housing supply has been insufficient to that population growth, which has added to pushing up prices.
One of the saving graces, of course, of those people that do own property, the equity in their properties has increased substantially, so it gives them a little bit of buffer from that angle. But what happens if things change? What happens if interest rates move a little bit? What happens if unemployment rises? These are the issues that people really need to consider, because for some time they've overlooked it. When you look at the flurry of buyer activity and the amount of properties that are being sold well over reserve, you've got to start to wonder, when is this going to kick in?
Yeah, I can't agree more. We've already seen, banks, as soon as you get an origination of a loan, the banks are already be factoring in, say, a 2 percentage point increase or a buffer. So if rates do rise by 2%, that should already be factored into your serviceability. But we're already finding that a lot of people who are facing higher mortgage rates now, particularly investors. Because remember, mortgage rates for investors have already increased by 25 basis points on average since around August or September last year. So those investors are already facing essentially one Reserve Bank rate hike of 25 basis points.
Tim, fair to say that I think you and Charles have agreed that maybe there's only so much Treasurer Scott Morrison can do when it comes to housing affordability tomorrow night. There is talk, though, about allowing first home savers to divert pre-tax earnings into a home deposit account. How effective would that be?
It's definitely a step in the right direction, but of course this is a real demand-side initiative. It has the potential to push more people into the housing market, which isn't a negative. Absolutely, when it's first home buyers are really struggling to raise a deposit, I think it is a positive initiative, but it needs to be accompanied by more policies on the supply side. This is one of the key things the Reserve Bank Governor and it was talking about as well, is that if you want to improve housing affordability, you don't try to push more demand into the marketplace. It really comes back to adding more supply and adding supply that people actually want, which really means enough high-rise apartments.
Well, the quick concern around it from some of the politicians is that if you give first home buyers more opportunity to buy a property, they're going to enter and reignite what was a heated market, and that's part of the discussion that's going on. So it's just a double-edged sword from what I can see. Tim, do you expect any surprises in the budget, or has everything meaningful being strategically leaked so far?
I think there's always going to be some surprises in the budget, and the devil's in the detail, that's for sure. Yeah, one of the interesting things that has been leaked is around infrastructure, and this goes hand in hand with housing affordability. And I think we are going to see some big announcements around the infrastructure spend. So if we can see more roads, more railways, more public transport being funded by the federal government, that's really going to help to unlock many of those outer fringe areas that are simply inefficient to get in and out of.
So there's your tip on where to buy, Tim. I think you start with the infrastructure and then you work outwards from there, and then you wait.
It's always a good plan. Yeah. Capital gains follows infrastructure spend.
Well, look, it's always fascinating to talk to you, Tim, because you just have such a wealth of knowledge, and I really always appreciate the fact that you take the time to talk to us. Tim
Lawless, thank you, mate. Head of Research from CoreLogic, and I'll be looking for the trains tomorrow night. I love my trains. We are property fast tracking tonight with Charles Tarbey. 13 12 83 is the number. We've got Rodney who's called in for you, Charles.
Hello, Rodney.
Charles, how are you?
Now, Rodney, I'm seeing Glenbrook come up again. I because I live in the Blue Mountains in Glenbrook, I'm starting to wonder whether these calls are being set up to give me a hard time for next time I'm in town.
Can't they just talk to you over the back fence?
Have you been a long resident? Have you been a long-standing resident of the Blue Mountains, Rodney?
I have, and you know my grandfather from 30 years ago, so...
Oh, my God. Now I picked it. I've picked it. Jack's Hardware.
We have a very strong respect for you, Charles.
Jack's Hardware. Well, now, didn't you run for council, Rodney?
I did many years ago.
Oh, God love you, mate. You're a very bright young man. I do remember you now.
I just have a question regarding the US economy, Charles. Obviously, we're seeing Yellen saying to increase interest rates.
Yeah. Yes.
Obviously, they did that in 2006, 17 times, and then 2 years later, the GFC hit and pulled property prices.
This was when you were studying economics, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you think there's any impacts for Australia as the US starts to increase interest rates?
We don't have a choice at the end of the day. The US and China at this point would drive our economies in many ways. The Reserve Bank of Australia would love to leave interest rates on hold or lower them because of economic reasons, although the economy is travelling reasonably well. But Rodney, I think the movement in interest rates will occur, but I don't think it'll be the Reserve Bank. I think the rates will increase, but again, I think it'll be the banks that drive it mostly. I think it'll be APRA that'll place all of these different regulations that'll make it even more and more difficult for people to purchase, especially investors. So I do see a change. I know that they've started on the investors. I don't know. I'm sure they're trying not to get to the home buyer, their customer, at this point in time. But somewhere down the track, I believe they will.
Thanks for answering my question.
Yeah, cheers, Rodney.
Thanks for ringing, Rodney. Good to hear your voice.
13 12 83. Charles Tarbey here to take your calls tonight on Property Fast Track. If he can help you, 13 12 83, or email feedback@talkinglifestyle.com.au. Charles Tarbey here tonight taking your calls on 13 12 83, and an email in from feedback@talkinglifestyle.com.au from Luke. Here we go, Charles. Hi, property guys. Regarding Sydney new strata unit complexes, buying a new unit is expensive. When you add up land costs, building costs, other costs, you get a sales price. How much profit is generated within a sales price as a percentage?
Okay, I guess I could look at that a couple of ways, for whether it's from a real estate practitioner's point of view or from a developer's point of view.
Yeah.
I work backwards on a development. It's really straightforward, actually, and they've got to figure in a certain amount of profit to make a development work. So if I was looking at a site, let's say a completed site, and it was $400,000 for a house and land package, which is pretty hard to find, that I'd want to be saying at this point in time that 25% of that needs to be my profit to make it viable. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be either way. So when I work out a development, if I look at a block of apartments and I know I could sell those apartments for, say, $1 million, then I work backwards from there. What's the cost going to be to construct? And then I add in my 25%, and then I can tell you how much I would pay per site for that development. All right. That's how they work it through. One of the things you've also got to watch for closely, Luke, is the fact that when you look at it from a real estate perspective, certainly in the past, real estate practitioners and investment houses, whether they be accountants actually selling real estate or people who just run investment seminars, they build in a very high commission. They've traditionally built in a very, very high commission, much, much more than the industry itself would take. Like traditionally, from a real estate perspective, in some parts of Australia, the fees have been down as low as 1.5% of the sale price just to get stock for sale. In some of the apartment complexes and those types of developments, agents were, developers were paying 4 to 5 to 6% commissions, which is significantly higher, of course. And this is why I've said to people a lot of the time, when you're looking at something new, it's fantastic, it's wonderful, it makes you feel great. Just around the corner is an older established property of similar character, albeit older, that you do a lot better with.
Good advice. Thank you. I hope that helps you, Luke. 13 12 83 if you've got a call tonight. If you've got a question for Charles, he's here to help you out. As we go around the grounds, thanks to Century 21's extensive national network of real estate agents, it's always good to get a snapshot of a particular region and get a bit more insight, boots on the ground, local expertise. Tonight, Brian Nancarrow from C21 Canberra City is on. G'day, Brian.
G'day, everyone.
G'day, Brian. Everyone. Yeah, who's that? That's Nick and myself, and there's young fella John here, Brian, telling us what we should or shouldn't do.
Not to mention the audience. Good evening.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Brian, I introed you earlier on about your extensive career in real estate and the fact you're right in the heart of Canberra and that you really have a strong connection from an international perspective, of course, because of your own knowledge and the transient population and also the Century 21 brand. But what I'd really like to know from you, because the marketplace in Canberra is getting a lot of attention, it's really all of a sudden come to the light, and we've been talking about it for nearly a year. What's going on in Canberra that's making everything move so quickly?
I think it's more it's our time. We're usually, you can set your clock 2 years in front of Sydney. So when Sydney peaks, we start to get off the ground here, and we've had a longer down period than normal, and I think we'll have a longer up period than normal. Stable change in Canberra is good for the market, people coming, people going, but there's a population growth here. There's people coming from other capital cities relocating here because of its work opportunities and family opportunities, school, lifestyle, income.
I don't know what the unemployment stats are for Canberra, but I would expect they'd be very low.
Very, very low, and 80%, well, they say not, but realistically 80% of the population is employed by the government or government-associated industries, and every fortnight those people get paid.
Well, there you go.
Regardless of what's happening elsewhere.
And I think that's the security. When you look at some of the country towns around Australia that have government bodies or government departments located in them, it does make them a lot stronger from a growth point of view and a security point of view. Brian, with your areas there, that you've got a number of suburbs that are opening up right around Canberra, and I've been told that the supply of blocks of land that are coming on the market are being met by very heavy demand.
Absolutely. Houses have That's what's leading the price rush. And land is in short supply everywhere in Australia, but specifically here in Canberra, we're behind in turning out blocks for house.
You are. Now, why do you think that is? Because we were talking to Tim Lawless earlier on, and we constantly chat about local council, state governments. Of course, you're a different world under your own in the Australian Capital Territory. But what's holding it up there, do you think?
Well, it's been the pipeline is so long for land development. It's one thing to offer a broadacre subdivision, but then to get someone to take it up in the hope that, in 18 months they might be turning out a service block for sale. Well, in Canberra it probably takes a little bit longer, but then the market has been in the doldrums since 2010 to 2016, so no one stepped in.
And so now, all of a sudden, if somebody said, where would you invest in Australia, I guess you'd say to people, well, you're going to get great, because you have a very strong property management division, so you would say to people that you can get them a fantastic yield and your vacancy rates would be low in Canberra.
Very low, yeah.
Okay. Look, Brian, I want to talk to you more about Canberra. Unfortunately, we don't always have a lot of time on with these shows, but I'd really like to get you back on and talk about the various suburbs and how Queanbeyan has now become very much a part of Canberra, even though it's in a completely different place.
True.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian.
There goes Brian Nancarrow from C21 Canberra City. Yes, housing politicians and their minions and more. Now, Wally Karpuik is at C21 Mawson Lakes at the other side of the nation in South Australia. G'day, Wally.
Good evening, Charles. How are you?
Good, and we've got Nick with us as well. He's the man that runs the show.
G'day, Wally. Enjoy you. You having a nice little Coopers after work, mate?
Oh, no.
Wally's a Scotch man. What is it, Wally? You drink something really odd, some sort of Scotch with something in it, and every time I stand near you, you confuse the barmaid.
Don't worry about the barmaid, just worry about the Scotch.
All right. So Mawson Lakes is, not that far north of the city of Adelaide. Exactly how far, Wally? Would it be a dozen to 15 kilometres north?
No. Look, Mawson Lakes is a suburb north of Adelaide. It's 12 kilometres.
12. Well, I wasn't far off.
Not bad, mate.
No,
You still got
not
it.
Bad.
Yeah.
It spans over about 6.7 square kilometres north of Adelaide. It houses about 3,600 homes and a population of around 11,000 people, which is pretty good.
Now, it's a unique development. Tell me a bit about why it's so unique compared to the suburbs around it.
Okay, well, Mawson Lakes it's a lifestyle suburb. There's no doubt about that. It's in an area which is, at one stage, and possibly still is, has the largest self-contained water recycling system in Australia. We've got our purple water and our drinking water, which is unique in South Australia.
Well, it's good because South Australia is the driest state, isn't it? The driest continent, so you need that stuff.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
But not only that, the infrastructure that's been put into Mawson Lakes has been fantastic. We have a university campus. We have Technology Park, which houses 126 local and international companies. It's in a position where it's got 5 man-made lakes.
And I'm looking at a map now, Wally. I guess it's called Mawson Lakes for a reason, apart from the fact that it is named after a gentleman by the name of Mawson.
That's correct.
But would you say, with the fact that you've got those companies, Technology Park, the Uni SA campus there, is that where most of your investment comes from? Is that where you can almost guarantee a tenancy in that area?
Well, with UniSA as well, you have there is a huge international number of people that come to Mawson Lakes for UniSA and also for Technology Park.
A lot out of Malaysia, don't you?
A lot of Asian people come through this way, and honestly, it is an international suburb. It's from both of those areas. Not only that, but you have we're only 15 minutes away from Edinburgh, from the Air Force, and also 10 or 15 minutes away from the shipbuilding scenario down at Port Adelaide.
Okay, so, and you've got a rail line there too, right? Rail station?
Yeah, we do. We have one of the largest interconnectors from Mawson Lakes to the city. It's actually a bus and train interconnector. It takes you 14 minutes to get into the city.
You said lifestyle, Wally. I guess if you Google a picture of Mawson Lakes, you see a lot of apartments, townhouses, style of developments. You can see a lot of commercial area there. I mean, I've spent some time there with you, and there's some beautiful restaurants opening up through the area. So it certainly does have a lot to offer.
Absolutely. It's one of those suburbs where Mawson Central itself has got a huge shopping centre. It's got a library. It's got everything that you would like. It's
would you? Sorry, Wally. Would you just give me quickly the median price in that area?
Sure. Median price at the moment for housing is around the 480 mark.
Okay, wonderful.
And for units, you're looking at around the 320. 330,000.
There you go. Wally, thank you so much. We've got a young producer here. Every time we talk, he thinks about where he's going to invest. He changes his mind every week after he hears the guys. So, Wally, thank you so much for giving up your time.
Thanks, guys.
Wally's at C21 in Mawson Lakes, South Australia. Yeah, looking pretty good. So you can average price here on an apartment, 320 and 480 for a house.
Yeah.
Century 21 is the world's largest real estate company, so how does that help you sell your home in your neighbourhood? It gives your local Century 21 office access to the best technology and knowledge base in the world. Each office is independently owned and operated, so your local Century 21 agent knows your city and your neighbourhood. They know how to get things done locally. Being part of a bigger picture allows Century 21 agents to offer a better level of service. They're drawing on the experience and resources of over 300 offices around Australia, and that number's growing. Century 21 is the fastest growing real estate brand in Australia. Whether you're buying, selling or looking for a new home to rent, contact your local Century 21 office to see why they really are smarter, bolder, faster. Visit century21.com.au. Now, a guy who's out there, he's in the backyards of places around Australia every weekend, is Matt Shalhoub, an auctioneer who runs his own company called Under the Hammer. Welcome to Property Fast Track. How you going, Matt?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Hello,
Pleasure,
Matt. Good to hear your voice again. We had a pretty busy weekend in Sydney. My stats showed that after we calculated today, because some of the clearance rates will come out on Saturday night, Sunday, and they change progressively, that we're still sitting in the mid-70s to high 70s overall in auction clearance rates. Even though that's lower than some people might expect, it's still a pretty fantastic result, wouldn't you say?
Look, I think it's a great result. I mean, I had a conversation today talking about clearance rates, and someone asked me how they dropped, and I said, yeah, they had dropped marginally, but they're still at the mid-70s, which is good in any market as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I was saying a little earlier on that, you go and work in an auction, and my definition of a tough market is when the auction clearance rate's between 40 and 55%. That's when the market's tough and changed.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned previously, I think the fact that we've still got those clearance rates with significant numbers, even though numbers have reduced a little bit, to have a fairly high clearance rate with significant auction bookings, I think it still shows some good signs.
We always talk about the activity at an auction, and again, there were posts all over Facebook from the weekend about how much over reserve the agent got for a vendor, etc. But when you go to these auctions and you conduct them, are you noticing a different level of energy? Because we've been talking about that over the past few weeks. So you're noticing a lower level of energy activity?
Absolutely. There's definitely been a shift. I think what we've noticed significantly is the number of registered parties per auction, and there's sort of a little bit of apprehension, not knowing where they want to sort of place themselves. So the most important thing, though, is that the key buyers are still showing up, but it definitely has been a drop in intensity. Okay,
with the clearance rates, from Saturday, remembering that by the time we get to Monday, they're a little bit higher, but from the actual day itself, showing around 73, 74%, do you think it's a mistake to read too much into this result?
I wouldn't say it's a mistake. I mean, we monitor, as part of our business, as you can appreciate, we monitor figures very closely. And one of the other stats that we actually look at is the 14 days after auction as well.
Yeah, good.
And I'll be happy to report to you guys again with the exact figures, but we see a very large percentage of that 25, 27% of properties that didn't sell on the weekend there'd be a very large percentage of those sold within the next 14 days.
Well, I can tell you something, Matt. When I keep these stats, I keep them for every week, and I've got them from 4 or 5 years ago, the clearance rates. And I can tell you this time last year, on exactly the same weekend and the same date, it was 72.6% clearance rate for Sydney. But I can also tell you that overall across the country, it was 67.5% clearance. When I look at the average for the weekend just gone, that came in at 74.6. So overall, it's still almost 10, well, about 8 points higher than this time last year overall.
Absolutely, and if you look at not only the Sydney stats, you look at Melbourne as well, for example, they're also running relatively good on their clearance rates, and they're always running strong numbers in auction volume. So it says something about the major capital cities, I would definitely say.
So, well, Matt, look, thank you so very, very much again for giving up your time.
Have a great night, mate.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, buddy. There's Matt Shalhoub there. Now, you're back next week, Charles.
Yes,
Thanks for your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
It's always good to get your wisdom on the real estate scene. 13 12 83.